Okay, hello and welcome to today's webinar. My name is Jen, and I'm going to go ahead and get started because it's 1:00 p.m. on the dot. So today we're going to be talking about some of the options that we have available for creating donations reports. Before we get started, I just want to point out over on the toolbar that you have for your webinar, we have an area on that toolbar for questions. Now you'll notice that everybody is muted, their mics are muted, and that's just because we want to maintain focus and keep the background noise to a minimum. So if you do have any questions about any of the information we're going over today, you can go ahead and type those into the question panel. We've got Josh with us to answer those questions as we go along. We would just like to ask that you please keep those questions to the topic at hand. And if you do have questions about your personal data for the church, we ask that you'll give us a call instead of asking those questions here in the webinar. All right, I think that's about all the housekeeping business we have to talk about before we get started, so let's go ahead and dive in. So we're going to go into our donations module, and we're going to click on Reports and Export way up here at the top of the screen. Now today we're not going to be going through the different types of reports that we have available. If you click on each of these buttons, you'll get drop downs for all of the different types of available reports. Today, however, we're going to be focusing on the ways that we can filter these different reports to alter the givers or the people that are listed on the report. So for all our examples today, we're just going to go ahead and use the donations log report. So if you're following along, you can open that up and take a look. Also, if you are following along in the donations workbooks, the topics we're discussing today are in the D105 section of the workbooks, and it should be focusing on pages 2 through 9. All right, so this donations log report screen first comes up to our filter tab right here. And I'm going to bust out my highlighter. And you can see across the top here we have several tabs. We're going to start with our filter tab, and we're just going to work our way from top to bottom and left to right and go through our options here. So first of all, we have this line for giver. Now, the giver line is going to allow us to select just one specific giver to print a report on. So if we wanted to see only the donations for a single giver, we could either type their name in this giver box, and as you're typing, the list below will change. As you can see, I'm going to type Oliver, and as I type more and more of the word, the people who match that criteria will be the only ones listed below. So let's say we were going to pick Jack Oliver, and then if I were to click print, we would get a report for just Jack Oliver's donations. And you can see there's only 2 donations so far in our demo data here, but this is just showing the donations for Jack Oliver and no one else. And additionally, once we have a person selected, the next field down is pledge. Now this allows us to select the pledge for the current selected giver. So if you only wanted to see donations given to a particular pledge by that particular giver, you have that option available to you as part of your search criteria. I'm going to go ahead and clear those out. And again, that pledge is only available once you've selected a giver. Next, you have this account drop-down. And here we could choose to only see the donations toward our missions account, for example. And then click print, and you can see every single donation has the missions account listed as the account toward which the donations are going. So that's all we're seeing when we make an account selection. Next we have check or reference number. Now this would primarily be used if you only wanted to see one specific donation with a specific check or reference number. So typically in reports you're probably not going to use this field so much, but it is available to you here just as it is in, for example, browse donations and many of these other reports that we're looking at. Next you have user, and this would allow you to search for donations that were entered by one particular user of your church windows. Now this relies on your database having set up different security profiles for different users. For example, if you have one for the church secretary, one for the treasurer, etc., you could type in one of those usernames to see only the donations entered by a particular user. Next we have batch codes, where you could select to see only the donations in a particular batch code. For example, we could see only our late service donations or our non-cash giving batch codes. We can just go ahead and limit those batch codes. And then below that, you do have an option to include or exclude batches with no batch code. Now, obviously, if you're not using batch codes, you definitely need this box to be checked. Otherwise, you would exclude all of your donations. All right, so we also have an option down here in the bottom to show reversed. And that will allow us to see any donations that were entered and then later taken back for one reason or another, whether it was a duplicate or it was just misentered entirely. Below that, we can also limit by our payment methods. You could select, cash and check only, or you could select any combination of the payment methods you want to use, and you even have a checkbox over here for none. Two checkboxes that I skipped that I'm going to come back to real quick up here that relate to the giver field are inactive and terminated and sort by giver number. If you want to see this drop-down list sorted by number instead of by name, you can check that box and you can see all of our givers with no number are down at the bottom, and then we have the givers with numbers in numerical order. And if we uncheck that, it defaults back to last name or group name order. And inactive and terminated will allow us to see donations for people who have been terminated, which is useful because, if someone passes away partway through the year, they still had donations that you might want to see on a report prior to their death. So that inactive terminated is checked by default here, because most of the time you do want to see those donations regardless of the termination of the individual. Continuing over to the right column here, we could choose if we wanted to see only giver numbers in a certain range. For example, maybe I only want to see people who have giver numbers from 50 to 100. And if I click print, then in my case, I've only got one person in that giver range because we don't have a ton of people entered into our demo data. So you can see 74 is the only giver who's in that range between 50 and 100 for me. Now, just to clarify, you don't have to use giver numbers at all, so this field might not be useful to you, but it is there if you are using giver or envelope numbers. Next, we have our date range, and here you could take this all the way back, to as far back as you want to go, and you can limit it to any set of dates that you want to see. If you want to see just one date, then you're going to need to put the same date on both sides, on the to side and the from side. Now, the difference between date occurred and date posted is going to be dependent upon either the date that the donation was received, that's date occurred, or the date that you entered it into the computer, that would be date posted. So you have the option to display your report by either of those two date ranges. Next, you have transaction number. Again, similar to check or reference, that's probably going to be extremely limiting. But it is available to you if you need it. Finally, you have amount. If you wanted to see maybe donations between $50 and $100. Lori says that the sound is going in and out. I'm not sure if anyone else is experiencing that. Lori, it may be something specifically with your computer. If other people are having sound difficulties as well, maybe you can go ahead and raise your hand over in the side panel. Lori, it looks like other people are having no issues, so I'm going to recommend that you check out maybe the sound settings on your computer and see if you can figure something out there. All right, continuing on. Down in this bottom corner, we do have a clear filter button. So if you've entered in information up here and you decide, actually, I need to just reset it, you can click clear filter and everything goes back to the defaults. All right, now we're going to move on to the Group and Sort tab next to the Filter tab. The Group and Sort tab allows us to sort by up to 3 fields. Now, sort field 1 is going to be the primary sort. So if we have giver selected, that's going to be the most broken down it can be. So if we wanted, for example, to see it slightly less broken down, we could sort by date or by account. You can sort by any of the donations data selections. Then you have the choice to sort by ascending or descending order, so smallest to largest or largest to smallest. And then you have these grouping checkboxes. Grouping will do exactly that. It will put all of the donations for each giver in a group. Or if we had chosen account, it would put all of the donations to the same account in one group. So that's what our grouping does. Our last two choices for grouping and sorting are to have separator lines, and that would be in between each giver. And we can show totals only instead of an itemized list of donations. Next, we have columns. And on the Columns tab, we have the left side, which are all the columns that we could possibly include on our report. And on the right side, we have the visible columns, which are the columns that we have decided will definitely be on the report. All we have to do is either double-click or single-click to highlight and then click the arrow to move items back and forth between the lists. We also have up and down arrows over here to rearrange the order. And we have a width column here where we can say, maybe giver doesn't quite need to be 35 characters long. We could take it down to 30 or maybe even 25. And that just allows us to fit more information per page across the width of the page. Next, we have our Fonts tab, which allows us to set different fonts for the header, of the entire page, the headings for each column, and the text for the body of our document. And you can change each of those three separately, and if you change your mind, you can reset to defaults. The last tab we have is Report Options, and this simply allows us to either include V and D indicators for our visitors and donors or not. So that's just going to put a little V or a D in brackets to the right of the name of the giver if we keep those checked. The last options we have down here at the very bottom, you'll notice those didn't change as we jumped from tab to tab. They stay the same, and that's because they are for the report overall. So Mildred, this is coming to your question. Down here, we have a checkbox to save selections as default. So if you have it all set up the way that you're going to want to keep using it in the future, you check this box, and then when you click Print and Close Out, next time you come back, it'll remember what you selected this time. You also have an option to show subtotals or not, and to suppress repeating transaction data. Repeating transaction data would be, for example, if multiple donations were given on the same day, it would only print that date once and then list each of the donations. So it doesn't have to say 8/23/2017 4 different times for 4 different donations by the same person. So it keeps it a little bit more clean and concise when you have that checked. And our last two choices over here are our starting page number, and that would be just something that you could change if you'd like to have the page numbering differently. If you're compiling a set of reports and you want the page numbers to flow in a custom consecutive order. Last, we have show long date and time, and that is referring to, if I just click print here, this date and day of the week up here at the top of the report that tells us when we printed it. This is the short version, believe it or not, with it all spelled out. The long version would also have an actual time stamp, not just the date stamp. So if we wanted that, we could add it as well. And you can see on this setup that I've got right now, it's breaking down one page into 2 pages because we are too wide. And so that's where that width column rather on the columns tab would come in handy. You can see if we change that account to 30 instead of 45 and click print, now we've gotten it all onto one page. All right, we're getting toward the end of our time here, and we've covered everything I've got in my outline. So if there are any questions, go ahead and type them in. I'm going to flip through my outline here and just double check that we didn't miss anything. The width is available. The column width adjusting is here on the columns tab. And you have a different width for each of the columns that you're putting on the report. So the width is, you see it's got this asterisk here, and the asterisk is telling us that that width is the number of characters. So the date is 10 characters, which allows us the perfect number of characters for a date. The total width of the page is going to be dependent on the font size. And you can see down here it also says, a W or a $sign uses more space than the letter I or a comma, for example. This columns tab is used throughout most of Church Windows for different reports and other different functions. So this columns tab you're going to want to get super familiar with because it's all over. Let's see, John's asking about doing a report selecting a date occurred for July and posted in August. You could do it that way, absolutely. All you would have to do is, if I plug in your example, if we say it occurred between July 1st and July 31st, but posted in August, that's all we would have to do. And then we would click print, and I'm guessing I don't have any data that fits that, so I get there are no records to show. But John, just to give you an example, you absolutely can combine any of these data choices on the filter tab to get the exact data that you're looking for. And this is a great example of how we can do that sort of cross-reference, as it were. No problem, John. Glad that was helpful. All right, well, we are past the 20-minute mark. So again, if there are any other questions, get them typed in. I'm going to keep the room open for a little while. And if you've gotten the info you need, go ahead and we'll say goodbye for the day. Thank you for coming, and we hope it was helpful. And we hope you take a look at more of our webinars in the future. Priscilla, it looks like you've put in a question mark, but let's see. I'm not seeing a question that came in from you. So if anybody does have any questions, go ahead and type them in. All right. Looks like no more questions, so I'm going to go ahead and close the room. All right, thanks again, everybody.